Welcome back to the new Frontline, a new Freedom Foundation podcast. If you're just discovering us and you aren't familiar with the work of the Freedom Foundation, I'd encourage you to go watch our first episode titled The Battle We Fight to get the down low on who we are and why we're here. This episode, I'm going to be introducing a practice used very commonly by government unions, something called release time. It's the first of what I'm sure will be a very reoccurring series on this channel, discussing what unions get up to when they think nobody's watching. My name is Siena Rose. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get into it.
Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look.
This practice of release time is one you may have actually heard of already. It's also sometimes referred to as official time or taxpayer-funded union time, but all these titles generally refer to the same concept. If you have heard of it before, I would bet dollars to donuts you've heard of it referred to via the union branding approved title of official time, because using that term official time implies that anyone on that time is doing official and reputable and approved and good works. But it's a union. And understanding that does beg a question. If official time was truly reputable and good work, why does a union need to try so hard to brand it as such? What are they hiding? And before I get too much more into the weeds in this line of questioning, let me first define our subject. An article from the Goldwater Institute explains release time as, quote, a practice that occurs on the local, state, and federal level by which government employees are released from the jobs they were hired to do and instead work full-time for their respective unions while still receiving their full pay and benefits paid for by taxpayers, close quote. This means that when an employee engages in release time, they are still being paid their full taxpayer-funded salary, perks and benefits, everything they get for doing their actual job without having to do their actual job. Now, if something about that seems a little bit off to you, it's because it should. In function, this practice allows the political and privatized interests of the union to be entirely funded by the taxpayer, because when a government employee is on release time to go work for their union, they're still being paid that fully taxpayer-funded salary. Therefore, the taxpayer is paying for these interests of the union. They are the only people in history to have ever figured out how to use taxpayer money to fund something that supports a very political and privatized interest. The point of paying taxes is to support something that would support and serve the needs of the public. Union work and union needs and union ideas do not serve the interests of the general public. They're very political, they're very privatized. No matter which way you cut this cake, everything a union does is very privatized and very political. They've been using this practice of release time, misusing it, I should say, since its creation in the 1970s. And that's the basic history of this, that this practice stems all the way back to the 1970s, right in that general period of public union creation. Unions representing federal employees have had that statutory right to official time since the passage of something called the Federal Service Labor Management Relations Statute in 1978. Now, this practice and its misuse has been curbed on and off since then by different presidential administrations. But thankfully, in present day, we have seen some huge steps taken by the Trump administration to finally place some concrete guardrails up in the work of federal unions to prevent the further misuse of this practice. Now, let's switch gears for a second. Because I fancy myself a logical person, if I'm to attempt to apply some logical reasoning to this, I am led to believe that union release time was created to allow union members and workers to attend educational conferences and trainings without suffering a loss of pay, because training and learning for the job can be considered part of the job. Like, that makes sense. It reminds me specifically of how the university I went to back in Montana would often pay for either in whole or in part for student leadership and professional growth credits and workshops for their students to attend, of which I'd say I attended like a ton of them, and they were awesome experiences for me. I probably would not be the same worker I am today had I not attended those conferences and had that experience. However, the glaring red alarm problem here is that, unlike in my university setting experience, there are no rules or like lines in the sand that create any sort of accountability for union release time. At the University of Montana, for example, when I was in student leadership, there was extensive paperwork. It was almost a gross amount of paperwork and a gross amount of hoops to jump through to account for every single dollar that was spent and where and why and on who. We had to go to physical, in-person meetings with our student government leadership and explain exactly how the money was being spent, why we needed it, and when it would be spent, and all this sort of stuff. We had to answer tons of questions about why we needed the money and where it was going. So it's weird, for a union in comparison that has a budget and resources that dwarf a university's. It's weird that there are no safeguards or any basic boundaries that create responsible use of release time and prevent against the misuse of taxpayer money. And this is especially weird because in 2023, President Joe Biden's Office of Personnel Management took down a website page that served as a repository for all the official release time. It was the only repository for all the release time used in the federal government. If the mic didn't just drop for you just then, let me rephrase because it should have. And I'm going to make freaking lose it. Look me in the eyes as I say this. A president of the United States who inherently runs on a platform of accountability and trustworthiness chose willingly to remove the only form of accountability for a practice that already lacks in accountability and trustworthiness. And he did so without saying so much as a peep because it was months before anyone realized it was gone. And this, of course, begs even more questions. Why did the president remove the only form of accountability for a practice that uses millions of taxpayer dollars every year? Don't we deserve to know where our money is going? Why was he hiding it from us? Why did he take the website down in such a shady way? Why did he never put it back up? Because it's been years since it's been up. So who knows how much taxpayer money has been spent on release time since then? The questions could keep going. And I digress. I'm getting a little worked up here. I know, I digress. Basically, all that to say, the questions could keep going. Because when there is no accountability to release time, and union officials aren't even required to disclose what they get up to on release time, we have to face the music that our money as taxpayers can be funding everything and anything that could be imagined. Thankfully, though, the tide is changing. Stuff is shifting. More and more people are catching on to the fact that this deceptive concept and corruptible concept of release time is not all it's cracked up to be. And it's happening both at the federal level and more intimately and locally at the statewide level, too. For example, one case I found was a 2024 case in Arizona. The Goldwater Institute, as I mentioned previously, sued the city of Phoenix, Arizona on behalf of two plaintiffs who, quote, objected to being forced to pay for unions to engage in recruiting, political lobbying, and other practices that don't benefit the tax-paying public, close quote. And then to kind of explain that a little bit, because lawyer speak can be a little bit hard to read, the city of Phoenix, Arizona had sanctioned 4 full-time release time positions in their system, and those 4 employees were working specifically entirely on matters such as a political lobbying, which we are well aware is a privatized interest. And this went over about as well as a bed of nails because people realized that this meant taxpayers were funding the salaries of people who were not providing any sort of public service. And that's the real meat of this. I found an Arizona Central article that just had this amazing quote. Quote, in their 7-0 ruling, the Arizona Supreme Court found that the city's payments for release time amounted to an unlawful handout and were skeptical about whether it serves any genuine public purpose, close quote. Their ruling found that this handout, which, perfect word by the way, handout is exactly what it is, was in violation of a cause within the Arizona Constitution, thus making release time unconstitutional. Chef's kiss. I could not have said it better myself. Now, Arizona is doing it right, thankfully, but at the federal level, there has been controversy and at the very least, varied views on how to curb and regulate the use of release time. In a blog post from Freedom Foundation's own Maxford Nelson, who is just a tremendous guy, I can't speak highly enough about him, he was the one who actually broke that original story about Biden removing the accountability website. In his blog post, Maxford writes, quote, in May 2018, President Trump issued Executive Order 13837, which, among other things, sought to regulate and limit the amount of official time used across the federal workforce to the extent permitted by law. Conversely, repealing EO 13837 via EO 14003 was one of President Biden's first acts after taking office. You would think that limiting a highly misused and expensive practice such as release time would be a no-brainer, but from actions like the Biden administration's show that apparently not, to the extent that they would think it's okay, grand even, to remove an entire accountability website dedicated to keeping this practice intact. Now, if you're curious about the other details of this story, this specific story of Max initially breaking the news that this website was missing, the link is in the description. Max is a thorough investigator and an excellent writer. He's well-versed in this topic. In fact, he also has an op-ed from April 2024 that was published on The Hill that goes into release time's origin and its recent history. So let's talk about what everyone's really wondering about, the cash flow of release time. Now, in that op-ed, Max cites some very big numbers. A fiscal report from 2019 from the Office of Personnel Management shows that, quote, federal bureaucrats spent an estimated 2.6 million hours on taxpayer-funded union time that year at a cost of about $135 million, close quote. That's a lot of money. And that number was taken towards the end of Trump's first term. And after Biden promptly took office and repealed Executive Order 13837, effectively all bets were off. And those basic limitations that Trump had set up for release time didn't apply anymore. Therefore, we really have no clue on how much taxpayer money has been spent on release time in the past few years. But given the state of the world, the accountability website being absent in its entirety, and the asinine pro-union crusade that's happening, we can easily ballpark a new number of annual expense of $300 million on taxpayer money being spent on union release time. Honestly, that's probably a low number, but regardless, just a hideous amount of money. All this matters because despite the union's attempt to convince you otherwise, release time is not a good use of your money. It's not a good use of your taxpayer money. Release time is a privilege of public service that has been sorely abused. It's also a symptom of the larger problem. A shady organization isn't going to do shady things out in the open, out in broad daylight. They're going to do the things that show their true character when they think no one is looking, when there is no accountability website from the government to keep them in check. A good organization, a good person with morals who cares about their members and cares about their money should not need a government website to use money wisely, to motivate them to be good people. That's not how it works. And this sort of stuff, these tricks, these habits do not come few and far between. It is what unions do every single time they think no one is watching them. It's all smoke and mirrors, baby. That's what our CEO likes to say. It's all smoke and mirrors. And looking at these specific examples and going into these real implications of what is happening with unions and what is happening with our money, our hard-earned money, show that union bosses and these big unions are just not to be trusted. I said it in our first episode, and I will happily say it again, but unions do not care about their members or the taxpayer. Their only thing that they're gunning for at this point is the money that's in your pocket, and they will lie straight to your face to get it from you. The more we understand the basic qualities of these unions and where their values actually lie, the more we understand how everything about them has gone so terribly wrong. There will be several more episodes coming in the future that talk about these true values, what unions do when they think no one is looking, and what we can understand what it tells us about what they believe in and what they actually value. Freedom Foundation advocates for the elimination of release time in its entirety. Taxpayers should not be funding private ventures. That's what unions are. They're corporations, they're private ventures. It's time to stop the taxpayer support. It's time to end release time. As always, I'll remind you that the fight for tomorrow, the fight for our tomorrow, starts today. It's time to show unions what we're made of. Thanks for joining me here at the Frontline, and I'll see you next time.